the person says, well, the world is filled with evil and suffering and very serious, extreme evil and cruelty. That's a really powerful objection. But the assumption there is that this ought not to be, that evil should not be the case.
Hey friends, it's Abdu Murray, and this is another installment of Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda. This is a series of very short interviews I do with people who are either professional apologists or evangelists, or people who think Christian, who think in terms of the interaction of Christian belief, thought, and culture, and ask them about times when we coulda, shoulda, or woulda said something different, either in a public engagement or in a private engagement. And the reason for that, friends, is because we I often hear, as someone who does public evangelism, I hear people say all the time, boy, I wish you were there when I was talking to and you name it, your friend, your brother-in-law, your mother, a guy on the bus, whatever it was, when he had this one objection. I know you could answer it really well. But the reality is, God has put you in their life. You can answer it well if you study to show yourself approved, but also just listen to the person and engage with them. But here's what we're doing with Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda. We're giving you instances where people like me, and others like me, who do this regularly, will tell you about times when we've messed up. Because oftentimes Christians are paralyzed. They don't want to engage in the evangelistic encounter. They don't want to get in the game because they're worried that they're going to strike out, or they're going to do more damage than they would good in that moment. Well, if someone like me, who does Q&As all the time, all over the world, or someone like me who has conversations on this all the time, and my guests can have self-reflection where we think, boy, I really botched that one, and thank God that the Lord was in it and that someone else came along and fixed things. I wish I coulda, shoulda, or woulda said something different. So if we have that and we replay it in our minds so that next time we'll do better, then I want to encourage you, friends, you can do the same thing. So I have on this particular installment of Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda, my good friend, Cameron McAllister. He is with Thinking Out Loud, and him and another good friend of mine, Nathan Rittenhouse, have a wonderful podcast called Thinking Out Loud, where they discuss and they think out loud together on really important and hot button issues. They get into some good trouble together during their conversations, thinking about things that are controversial. So I asked Cameron to join me for Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda to give me an instance of a time when he thought of an engagement, an evangelistic encounter where he coulda, shoulda, or woulda said something differently if he had a second chance to do it. And maybe you did have a second chance to do it with that person or someone else, and you did it differently. I can think of a million times when that's happened to me. I shared, by the way, an instance in which your dad happened to come to my rescue. I was at a Q&A, and a guy was rather snarky. And I was told ahead of time that this particular guy would come to this Q&A and he would be rather snarky. Mm-hmm. I had a bad evening because of the technical issues and other things. And he did, in fact, get a little snarky with me during the Q&A. And instead of being as compassionate, you don't have to be a doormat to be compassionate, but
Sure.
Instead of being as compassionate as I could have been, I got snarky back. And thank God your dad was within 10 feet of me, and he jumped into the Q&A and really helped to save the day. And I've since learned quite a few valuable lessons from then. So without further ado, Cameron, though, welcome to Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda, and help us with a story that you've got on a time when you coulda, shoulda, or woulda said something different.
Thanks, Abdu. And like you, I have so many. So I'll pick one in particular. But this happens all the time. So this was when I was at a university, and I was doing a dialogue, actually, with two skeptics. So it was one Christian, two skeptics. This evening was a lot of fun. But I think, especially if you're a person who's interested in apologetics, we often forget that we don't have to constantly be on the defensive. We can ask questions, too. And so my woulda, coulda, shoulda moment happened afterwards. We had a really good exchange. And they just kept asking me questions. One of the questions in particular was, well, so I believe that, I believe in science, and I believe that the natural sciences offer us a good explanation for everything that we see, but you believe in God. So you really have to answer for everything. The onus is on you. And it was in the wake of that it kind of hit me. I thought, wait, no. Because I believe in God, I actually have a really powerful foundation that undergirds our assumptions. And I say our assumptions because it hit me. You, Mr. Person who, extols the hard sciences, you have to make some really amazing and powerful assumptions for science even to operate. For instance, you have to assume that the universe is legible, that it's comprehensible, that it's knowable, that we can measure it, that we can understand its laws of cause and effect. You have to, perhaps even more radically, you have to believe that reason is reliable. You have to trust your mind or your brain. But if everything ultimately is a result of a cosmic accident, if your mind is a byproduct of random unguided forces, that makes those assumptions quite problematic and difficult. And so what I wish I had done, now I did talk about some of that, but here's a little line that's come to me since that I've developed that was really helpful, and with the help of Leslie Newbigin. Leslie Newbigin is really good on the subject of doubt. I would highly recommend his book, The Gospel in a Pluralist Society. And in some ways, he's really just expounding on the work of Michael Polanyi. That's a lot of names to throw at you. But he basically says, it's not possible to doubt without a prior belief. Your doubt is resting on a prior assumption. You can't call something into a question unless you're standing on some previous assumptions. And so the question that I wish I had at the time was, what is supporting your doubts? So what assumptions are supporting your doubt of the existence of God? So let's say the person says, well, the world is filled with evil and suffering and very serious extreme evil and cruelty. That's a really powerful objection. But the assumption there is that this ought not to be, that evil should not be the case, and that goodness ought to be primary. Well, where does that come from? Why do you have that assumption? And if you're a skeptical person, or if you disavow any belief in God or any higher power, evil really ceases to make sense as a category. You would have to say something more along the lines of it's undesirable, it's ugly, something that is inconvenient, that's not conducive to human flourishing, that sort of language, which is, most people would agree, almost grotesquely inadequate when it comes to the degree of suffering that we encounter. But again, the assumption that there should be some kind of moral order, that's a really powerful assumption, and that's supporting the doubt. And the same with the sciences, the idea that the universe is knowable, that it's ordered. Again, on the Christian worldview, that would make sense because the universe is not a byproduct of random unguided forces or a cosmic accident, something from nothing. It is the creation of a all-powerful, all-good, all-loving, supremely rational and relational God. And so I wish I had that question, what's supporting your doubts? That's been a very handy question over the years.
Yeah. I could think of a time where I was in a debate, and same thing. You're thinking on your feet in those moments, and the most pithy question or the most probing question doesn't come to mind at that particular moment, or even just the one that opens up a dialogue even further. Where you're not trying to do a gotcha, you're just trying to say, okay, I get what you're saying, but I think you have some things to answer yourself. That can be tough sometimes. And I think what I love about your story, just now you shared, is that so many of us, we don't walk away from a conversation thinking, boy, I blew it, and I think their faith is in a worse place than it was when I left. That happens sometimes. But that's not what your story is about at this particular moment. It's just, I could have done a more effective job. But you're not perfect. You don't think about those things in the middle of it, especially in a high-pressure situation. And how many of us, whether it's because we're sharing a platform with two people in a public sphere, or we're just sharing an elevator with somebody, think to themselves, boy, I want to get this right. And the pressure mounts and it builds because we take the evangelistic effort seriously. But we can't take it so seriously that we paralyze ourselves into not doing it. And so what I think that you communicated in that story, at least to me, and I think our viewers can draw from this, is that you're going to think of the better thing later. But because you thought of the better thing later on, if the question or an issue like that comes to mind, or comes up in the conversation, you'll actually think of it because you thought of it later. So we go through these things and refine our approach for the next time. I had a conversation. Well, it was a back and forth. It was during the crossfire section of a debate where an atheist asked me during the debate, if you think everything is designed like, everything, then, the watchmaker, the watch on the side of the beach or on the beach shores analogy doesn't make any sense, because you don't believe that you're walking on a sandy beach where there's a watch there and the watch is designed but the rest isn't. You are walking on a beach made of watches and you come across a watch. So you have no actual reference point to say this is designed versus everything else, because you think everything is designed. And I remember thinking, and I did answer the question. I did answer it from this perspective, but I've since thought of a better way to put it, which is he has committed a fallacy where he excludes, based on my view that God is in the created order, that everything within that order is itself a designed order, as opposed to allowing for some random, that even though the pebbles that formed the beach, the microscopic particles that formed the pebbles that formed the beach are themselves designed. The order of those pebbles on that beach don't have to be. They can simply be what they are. I didn't answer it that way. I answered it in a much more convoluted, fumble my way through it kind of a way. I think it still had at least some effect, but I since thought about it and said, man, if I had that to do over again, I'd do it differently. I think I would refine my approach and make it a little more sharp in terms of my response. Yours was a question, and this is an important part too. Sometimes it isn't the statement, it isn't the response that's important. It's the form of the question that makes it a real dialogue. And I think what you were doing was trying to make it a real dialogue as opposed to a series of gotchas. So I hope that's
correct.
I captured the spirit of what you were after.
Oh yeah, and I think just because you also don't have to always be on the defensive, you're free to ask questions back, and that helps to bring. And you will find sometimes though that if you're speaking to somebody who's a self-identified skeptic, I have found they're often quite reluctant to open up about their own assumptions. They're happy to have you on the defensive and in the hot seat. They're because they think of, sometimes the temptation is to think of your skepticism as a sort of shield against having to put your own commitments on the table. Yeah. But when you ask questions, you're bringing that, you're inviting an actual dialogue rather than the series of gotchas. I like the way you put that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, friends, this has been Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda. Thanks, Cameron, for sharing that story. And
thanks for having me.
I may tap you for more. If you have a wealth of these things, I may tap you for another one.
I got a lot of. I'm good at putting my foot in my mouth. That's one thing that I've gotten good at over the years. So I've got plenty of these.
Yeah. Aren't we all? So, thanks again for being on and sharing that story with us and encouraging folks as well. Friends, look up Cameron's podcast, by the way, along with Nathan Rittenhouse, Thinking Out Loud. He's also got a book out with his dad called Faith That Lasts. And if you want to get a book that really treats the subject of the tension that an emerging young man has with his faith, and struggling to understand his faith alongside of a devoted Christian dad, and how that interaction happens, and how do you forge a faith that actually lasts through the various avenues and challenges of life, then get Faith That Lasts by Cameron McAllister and Stuart McAllister. Be on the lookout also for Cameron's book coming probably in a few months, in several months from now, actually, called Cinema Inferno, How Horror Movies Can Save Your Soul. But until then, until next time, I should say, this is Abdu Murray with Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda.